Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Eric Miller. This is my first ever roundtable. I'm super excited about it. Joined by three progressive superstars returning. Jen Perelman, who ran in Florida's 23rd. How you doing, Jen?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming back and chatting with me. Jason Call, who ran for the House, Washington's 2nd District. How you doing, Jason?
I'm exhausted, but ready to fire it back up again.
I feel you. I feel you. And Kerri Evelyn Harris ran for Senate in Delaware 2018. How you doing, Kerri?
I'm doing good. I'm a little frustrated from last night, but I'm ready to keep fighting. And so ready to see where we all go together.
Yeah, just a little bit. Let me just start with that elephant in the room, if you will. Like, just kind of go around. Jen, what are your thoughts on the presidential election? How are you digesting it?
I mean, I feel like we've all been digesting this since 2016, really. I mean, this is the end for like people we've been digesting. But in Florida, which it's interesting, we're considered a swing state because it is pretty red down here. And I'm not remotely surprised. I live in one of 6 blue counties. And in my county, which is the bluest, Broward County is the bluest, I see much more enthusiasm for Trump, and I have for the past few years. So it isn't at all surprising. The fact that people were surprised that Florida was red that's surprising because it was really obvious to me. For me, this election doesn't affect what I'm doing. And so I'm on the same mission. It doesn't matter whether Joe wins or Joe doesn't win. We're still trying to get Medicare for all and a living wage and the wars. And so we're still doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, people are arguing that it'll be easier to do that with Joe in the White House. Empirical evidence to the contrary, I guess. I don't know. I don't know the answer. And I did vote for Joe. And again, I live in Florida, so it didn't really matter anyway. But I was never thrilled with that decision. I was never proud of it. I was never urging others to join with me and vote for Joe. I was never riding with Biden. So, I feel like we're probably all feeling just equally screwed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do want to ask about down ballot races and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you guys. Jason, what are your thoughts on the election?
I feel I'm in the same boat as Jen. I know when I mailed my ballot in, because we're all mailing here in Washington, I had posted a picture of me doing this, and I just said I hate every bit of this that I was forced into. I felt forced into voting for Joe Biden. I was never thrilled with him. I think, I can't speak to Kerri, but I think Jen and I certainly would go back to, Bernie would have won decisively. We can't know that now, but that's my gut feeling. When he is drawing in McDowell County, West Virginia in 2016 and 2018, when he is drawing thousands of people in the poorest, what you might call redneckiest county in the entire state of West Virginia and in the entire country. I think that was the McDowell County is the poorest county. I was actually down there a couple of weeks ago working for Paula Jean. But when he can draw people there and give them a message of hope, it's not a left-right thing. It's is your government functioning for you, or is it working against you? And I think what we see with Trump is that more people believe that, maybe government can't ever work for us, but at least Trump gets some things out of the way for them, rather than so many roadblocks they feel to their life that the Democratic Party institutes. I mean, I think of it as, well, at least Trump's not going to raise our taxes. And that's really meaningful for people who are living on the edge, whose lives are so precarious with paying bills and they can't afford to send their kids to college. Tax breaks are meaningful to them. Obviously the bigger picture is, well, they're not giving you anything in return. They're not, they're also cutting services, and they're also, making it harder for your kids to go to college. But they don't see that. They see that immediate, how do I live from day to day? And the Democratic Party just flat out failed to address that again. And so you see what we had in the election last night. It is amazing to me that we may come down to a Supreme Court battle over Pennsylvania, which, for God's sakes, was where Joe Biden grew up. I mean,
irony.
It is the irony of ironies that is where we are in this race. And, it's a shit show. Our whole political system is just a complete shit show, and we have got to bring it back to, can our government be functional for people? Because if we can't, I live in Washington State here, and we have Trumpers here. We have Proud Boys here. They're driving around with their Trump train flags. They had a parade through my town last night, and they're disaffected people, and and I don't understand the mentality of the Trump crowd. But we better figure it out, and I really think it has to do with they don't understand that government can work for them and should work for them.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you said about the Supreme Court. I posted a status earlier that the party that likes to drape itself in states' rights and supporting the troops is literally going to use the Supreme Court to overrule state law, counting ballots for active service members.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing that out in Detroit. If you've seen the post right now, people were yelling. They were about to do another Florida, Bush Gore Florida 2000 out in Detroit with ballot counting and trying to stop the ballots counted out there. So yeah, there's a real irony there about saying that they want freedom and democracy and then doing everything they can to actually stop it from taking place.
Right. You say irony. I say hypocrisy. What did you think? How were you holding up? What were your thoughts, Kerri, from last night to today?
I mean, I much of the same thing, right, as Jen and Jason. But for me, I think that it's at a point where everybody's been failed over and over again by the establishment, regardless of the name, right? I think you and I spoke about it before, Eric, where I said, if you take something such as welfare, right? The Republicans say, no, people should work hard and they shouldn't have handouts. Democrats will say, oh, but we need to help the people, but don't ever give you enough to actually succeed so everybody can keep running off the same issue. And that's the same with healthcare, education, infrastructure, everything falls under that same type of equation. And at the end of the day, we sit here and we think, how can we be in such a close race, right? And we forget that the vast majority of Americans don't even pay attention to politics until the last moment. As Jason said, they're just trying to live day to day. Politicians have have always been incredible at using propaganda to scare people into going in their direction, or to make it seem like they're doing something for them, and they're not. I don't know what your experiences have been in Florida and Washington, but I know, especially in low-income communities, Black, white, Hispanic, here and in other states that I worked on through the primaries, how many people, especially after the stimulus check came in, said that, Donald Trump might be a creep, or they would use other words, right? But at least he does what he says he's going to do. And he was smart. He fought having the stimulus check go out, but as soon as it was passed, he held off for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and all of us who have ever been in a place where we're living paycheck to paycheck, 2 weeks is a massive amount of time when you're generally living day to day, maybe hour to hour, waiting for the bill collector to make sure his signature was on the check. That wasn't helping those of us who get direct deposit feel any type of way. We had no idea who it was coming from. We just had $1,200. But people who have to cash a check saw Donald Trump's name on there, and they thought, wow, it's like hitting the lotto. $1,200 was huge for those communities, right? And so they were able to put aside all his other rhetoric. And in addition to that, a lot of them aren't even paying attention to the things he's saying, right? But they got $1,200. Well, they got a tax cut. They're not paying attention to the fact that tax cut ends really shortly, and they're going to go right back into the cycle that they were in. We assume that they're paying attention. They're not. And our failure, and I'll take it personally, is I don't feel for myself that I've gotten into enough places to be able to educate folks on the realities of what is happening, so that they are feeling like, yeah, I might as well leave work for an hour. I might as well try to find a babysitter so I can vote or help an elected official or anything like that, because it just feels empty.
Yeah. That's interesting. Jason, you kind of hit on it too. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that Donald Trump over his life has been a master brand builder. And that has been one of the big differences between how he has been able to be successful and the Democratic Party has not been able to counter it because they don't have a brand. Nobody knows what the Democratic Party stands for. And all of us on the left are yelling at the corporate establishment of the Democratic Party. You have to stand for something. This is why you're losing. This is why people don't show up for you, why people don't want to work for you, because you have not built a brand that is substantiated by action. And you have to do that. And Donald Trump, you know, as bad as a president, we can say he has been authoritarian, proto-fascist, whatever it is. Just like you said, Kerri, when the government does something, you know, when he's maybe forced into doing something that is helpful to the American people, he stamps it. You know, he said, I did this for you. So at least they can look at something and say, oh, he did something for me. You're exactly right about that.
Yeah, even when he hasn't. You know, that's when I was, you know, it's interesting you say that about the brand, right? You know, think of in a pandemic, you know, the left candidate can't even support Medicare for all. Right, because of, you know, donors and you know, fear of being called a socialist and whatnot, right? You know what, you know, versus, well, let's talk a little bit about wins, right? I don't want to just talk about Trump for an hour. You know, we have, you know, we doubled the squad, if you will, right? We got Mondaire Jones, we got Jamal, we got Corey, we got who am I forgetting?
Marie Newman,
right? And that is awesome. Like, I can't wait to see what Corey and Jamal do on the floor of the House. You know, what are your thoughts on doubling the squad? Let's go to Jen.
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm a big fan of Corey and Jamal's. I've met them. I think that they're amazing. I think that those, to me, are two people that will not and cannot be corrupted. So I feel very comfortable with that. I mean, there's some people where you don't really know what their intent is and what their motives are, but I know that those people are the real deal. So, you know, yeah, that's two more voices. We're just chipping away. Yeah. So I don't think anybody's expecting that even with this influx of new people that we're going to really see anything. I mean, look, the Democratic Party had numerous opportunities over the past few months to, you know, throw some policy our way and sort of, you know, throw anything our way to drag more, you know, get more support. And they really did the exact opposite every step. So, you know, this pushing them to the left thing, I just don't see it yet. But I think that, yeah, we've made some good inroads for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, great example. You know, something low-hanging fruit would have been legalization, right?
Yes.
That won across the board in every state last night, right? If Joe Biden had just had that in his platform, you know, that would get people out to vote for them. You know, what do you think about that, Kerri? About, you know, I will give you credit. When I talked to you first time around, you corrected me. I kept saying progressive. I still say progressive, but I've moved on to saying people-centered policy. Yes. And I credit you every time I say it. So, you know, how can Democrats build that brand of people-centered policies?
Yeah, I think that it's just that, right? When we allow people to jump on this progressive bandwagon, they remove themselves from the people. They're just doing kind of what Jen was saying, which is just keep changing your platform until it fits what people like, versus always making sure that people are at the center of everything you're doing. And I think it allows us even to hold people to a different standard, right? We have to be cautious, even those of us who traditionally say progressive or left or whatever. Sometimes we think that someone's on the same team as us because they're saying the right thing. Right. And then we get burnt at the end, whether they're elected to some position or we realize after they've won, they just fall off. Or they just truly aren't dedicated to the movement of people. As Jen said, this election has no consequence on the work she's going to do. Why? Because she was dedicated to the work. You know, win or lose, she was going to be in this. Win or lose, I am in this. I'm assuming the same for you, Jason. You didn't say it, but
I've been doing this for 30 years.
Yes,
so,
right?
I've been an activist for 30 years.
That's the difference. But we forget there are still people that sometimes we support wholeheartedly, and then we realize, wait, they weren't really involved until it became kind of like the sexy thing to do. And then we wonder, well, where'd you go after you lost? And we can't be surprised. One of the reasons many of us were so inspired by Bernie and supported him was because he consistently stayed centered on the people, even when it was hard. And he understood that a lot of his politics weren't sexy at the time, but he knew how to work the system. He was the amendment king. They would always say, oh, he never passed anything, but he was the amendment king for a reason. People knew that he had great ideas. He could get a Republican to pass his amendment, but if he came out with a certain bill, they wouldn't go forward. And so he knew how to use his power for the people. And we need to make sure that
his name being on it was never important to him. So many people came out over his career in Congress and said, listen, he took his name off it just so he could get it passed because it was
exactly. And those are the type of people we have to look for at every level of government in our candidates, because people are going to start to pay more and more attention. And if we start to look like an establishment ourselves, the people are going to turn away. And that's why I think it's incredibly important to say people-centered and truly be people-centered in everything we do.
Yeah,
I think it's a really salient point there. I actually had an argument with friendly argument with my local state Owl Revolution because they had done some endorsements, and I'm a board member, and being a candidate kind of took me out of the loop in their endorsements. And I saw their endorsement list, and I said, why is this person on the endorsement list? And they will, that's who the people voted for. And I said, you guys got to run this by me because he's not a progressive. He's calling him a progressive, and he's supporting a couple of things that we like our current state single payer bill that we're trying to get passed. But he has taken money from all sorts of terrible people in the past. And I said, once we trash that branding of who it is that we're going to, we can say he's the best candidate. You should vote for him. He's the best candidate. But to give that same person our endorsement,
yes,
that's a whole different story. Okay? Vote for this guy because he's the best person in the race. No, he's not getting our endorsement because our endorsement actually means something.
Exactly. And again, that comes back to the people-centered. It's almost it's measurable, right? If you're people-centered, if somebody says, let's cap healthcare at 10% versus Medicare for all, it's hard to disprove that Medicare for all is a more people-centered option. It's not to say that the 10% at one point wasn't more of a people-centered option, but now what we have, you're forgetting that the fact that people are damaged by COVID. And even before that, we knew there was a lot of damage in communities, people living paycheck to paycheck. So capping at 10% of an unexpected cost that's why we had bankruptcies at the levels that we did based on healthcare. And so if we can start getting people to think that way, I think it will make a big difference. And even folks who have been a part of our quote unquote establishment for a number of years, some of them are starting to learn. In the past, they took corporate money. Then they realized, oh, you don't really have to. In the past, that was the game they had to play. And then you saw the people who were willing to change that, right? Elizabeth Warren took corporate money before, and then she stopped, right? There were people who did things because they felt they had to. And then they realized as campaigns were running, you didn't have to do that in order to compete, in order to serve the people, you don't have to fall into the pockets of corporations. Well, as we're learning, we can offer the grace to people. But once you realize we've broken that mold, all of us on here have broken the mold to show that you don't need corporate money. You don't need anything but the people's backing, whether it's their dollars or their sweat equity. And we've proven it time and time again, every election cycle for a number of years now. So to now say, well, I have no other choice. Now we can call you a fraud. Now we can say you're no longer focused on the people. And now we can push you out of the way. But the other people who are evolving with us, there is some wisdom with them. And we should learn from it, and they need to learn from us. But we're cracking at the seams, and the people aren't trusting us, and there's good reason.
Yeah, and there's a bit of shades of gray to that too. Like you think of the incumbents that withstood their challenges this time, even amongst the squad, right? AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar. Ayanna Pressley has cast a few questionable votes, right? But I wouldn't throw her out of the boat as a progressive, let's say, right? Barbara Lee, Karen Bass, et cetera, Ro Khanna, right? So there are allies and there are shades of gray, and there is, none of them are infallible, right? Even Bernie has cast some questionable votes and stuff, right? So, there's a bit of the left has that stigma of eating their own in a way, right?
Purity test. It's purity test, and it's terrible with them. And they are often, I feel like on the left, sometimes we are our own worst enemy because we get so all or nothing with certain things, and it makes it hard. I mean, I have alliances with our local Republican organization because they believe in Everglades restoration. So, that's something we could work on. But a lot of the people in our progressive caucus would have never even considered going to one of these meetings and meeting these people. Meanwhile, they ended up partnering with us on our citizens election audit, which was a nonpartisan audit over the entire county, which is amazing. So just because somebody isn't totally an ally doesn't mean that there's not progress being made by that coalition with that individual. And I think that that's something where the left actually tends to be more guilty than the right in just not willingness to, oh, well, she supported this, so she supports that, and da-da-da. And it's like, that might be a problem for that, but let's work with her on this. And that's just something I notice is worse on the left.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Jason?
Well, I do think it's important that when questionable votes are made, and I think this was something that Bernie was very good at, that when questionable votes are made, that the person who makes those votes does everything they can to draw a very clear picture of what the situation was, why the vote was cast, why they made that choice. And then it is incumbent upon the people on the left to listen to them and try to understand their position. They may reject it, but you can't to have this idea that the left itself is some kind of monolith, the way I think a lot of people do with the African-American community. The African-American community is some monolith and they vote the same way on everything. And, obviously that is not true. And I think that the left has to do the same with themselves. And but to give people the chance, and then to have those politicians, like if you have a politician who you feel is somebody you trusted enough to work for, to give your money, your sweat equity to, get them in office. If they do something that you don't like, hear them out. Let's talk about why. Let's talk about why it happened and come to some common ground. Because I pretty much trust Bernie implicitly. I really do. I mean, just because I know at his core he is people-centered and he wants to work for people. So if Bernie has done something that I might personally not have agreed with, I am pretty damn sure that there was some situation that went along with that I was considering, and that if I give that consideration, I'll say, all right, he made the right choice on this one. I mean,
and there's nothing wrong with not agreeing. Also, like somebody could just do something and you just have a disagreement as to what that is, but I don't like the idea of that whole cancel thing. Like everybody has to be completely in line. Yeah. And then as far as when people make their votes, you know what people want? They want transparency. I have talked to more people here and I've said to them, look, as a representative, it's not like I go to Congress and all of a sudden you're getting Medicare for all. That's not how this works. And nobody expects that. They want you to level with them and be transparent. So if you vote a certain way, like Jason was just saying, that there very well could be a reason. Be transparent. That's all it is. And if you're transparent, maybe we'll agree, maybe we won't, but at least you're owning it. I think that's what people want.
Yeah, and it's just a single data point in a career and a voting record and a platform and a career of integrity and so forth. I actually got a question from my friend Kimberly Blatt, so I'm going to throw this out to you guys. Question from her kiddo: how do we break the two-party system? That's an easy one, right?
I was going to say maybe her kid has some suggestions, because I say inside and out. I say you do every angle that you can come up with, and you do it all. That's what I sort of think about it.
Yeah, I mean, on the ground activism stuff, like the stuff that I have been doing for the last 30 years, being involved in healthcare movements, in environmental movements, in anti-war movements. There's more going on the ground than what is going on in Congress, and it's the strength of those movements on the ground that can put pressure on Congress. I mean, it's a tough road, however you do it, because you're fighting the oligarchy, and they've got money just buried in everything, and most of the people who are representing us at all levels are, quite frankly, more beholden to those dollars than they are to actually serving the needs of people. We're in a really frustratingly scary place right now, and for me, environmental concerns, I think healthcare concerns are certainly immediate and necessary, but if we don't get our environmental situation sorted out, we're not going to have a planet in another 50, 75 years, and how to get people to see the immediacy of those environmental concerns, that we have got to stop carbon output, that we have got to change our transportation systems, that we, all of the things that go along with that. You are fighting corporate money the entire way. There's nothing new about that. So you have to have activist movements on the ground, but we got to keep getting people in, like the squad, and expand the squad and keep building that power. And you'll notice that Ilhan Omar and Rashida and AOC, they all got reelected in landslides. They are masterful at communicating with their own communities and assuring that their own communities that they are there working for their best interests every single day, and they are believed, and they do it in a way that is so different from our standard corporate churning out garbage politician, that they have captured the attention of the entire nation. And we have to build on what they have done. I mean, they are prophetic, in my opinion, in terms of how, and so what you were saying, Jen, about the left eating its own. I saw a lot of the left go after AOC for being a little bit too cozy with the establishment on this issue and that issue.
That's right.
And it was a phenomenon to watch, because I'm sitting here going, our hopes are resting on her right now. Our future is resting on someone like her, who is learning the system, and she's first term. You imagine the pressure that she is under as a first term congressional representative, and doing the amazing work that she has done, taking the corporatocracy to task. I'm sure the threats that she has received, and that she gets out there and fights it every day. We have got to support her, and we have got to expand on what she is doing.
Yeah. Let me. I know, Kerri, you and AOC kind of started with Justice Democrats together. Just speak to her authenticity. If she's the same person you saw then that you see now, despite all the pressure that Jason just described.
Yeah, absolutely, she is, and like I said, you could tell the people-centered people, right? There's insane pressure, and she would be the first to admit that, right? But people also have to understand, outside of her, any of us, we know that there's strategy to this. We don't exactly, and there is nothing. If you think that we're running this game right now, you're delusional, and you're actually getting in the way of forward movement, right? We have to sometimes, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, you make compromises. Your kids, right? You make compromises. You go to bed at night. Can I get 5 more minutes, right? Is it really worth this fight? Should I give them the extra 5 minutes, right? These are realities. And when there's a whole group that runs the whole show, and we only have a few folks, there are times that you're going to have to make the hard decision just to make sure that we can make some advancement for the people. At the same time, building up our own ranks. And so I think that, again, as Jen said, these purity tests actually injure us. Right? They make it so that we are assuming we are running the game because we've had a couple of wins, and we are far from it. I'm the youngest of 6, I never got to run a game until I was much older, right? And then you get better, and then you can start to change the rules, right? You can't change the rules until you've had enough people on the board, enough time in to be able to change it. And I'm not saying wait your turn. I'm saying we need more of the squad.
We need more people.
Right? Exactly. And that means at every level. I don't know, Jason and Jen, what your experience was with staffers. Mine were all green, and they did an amazing job. However, they were green, and so that kind of put us back. The next group of people that are going to run are going to have staffers that have more experience. We need to train staffers. We need to train candidates. We need to train not just campaign staff, but people who can write legislation. I remember Rashida telling me, she's like, Kerri, we don't have any of our own people who know how to write legislation. on the Hill. And she said, it's so frustrating to me when I'm trying to explain to my staff what I want to do for my district, and they're not getting it, right? And so it's across the board. And so what I would say to the person with the question, so we don't get too far off task, is we need structure, right? The reason we have a strong two-party system, one, was by design, but two is because every time we think we're creating a third party, a fourth party, a 100th party, whatever it is, we never really have structure. It's this idea of like, oh, we all care about the environment. Oh, we all care. But okay, but we still need rules. We still need a structure to make sure that we have money coming in, that we have people running different pieces of it. We can't think that it can just be a kumbaya movement, or we will never be able to move forward. And so I believe a third party, I would love to see even more than three parties, is necessary for a strong democracy. However, if we keep fooling ourselves and thinking we don't need a structure, we will keep having this conversation for years and years to come. And I honestly, personally believe that for us to start to get to that structure, we have to start creating those training courses. So to campaign staff, candidates, legislative staff, all of them, we have to have a slate of people, a whole bench ready to go, and then we can start the party formation.
I love that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, there's Nabila Islam started the progressive list, and that's part of her focus is, training, getting staff, right? You need you're a progressive running somewhere in the middle of the country, and you need a campaign manager, right? This is kind of a directory that she's putting together, the progressive list. Let's talk a little bit about races, right? So there were a lot of candidates that I was really pinning a lot of hopes to yesterday, and I could rattle them off: Julie Oliver, Mike Siegel, Beth Dolio, right? Every one of those is heartbreaking. Adrienne Bell, John Hoadley. I could list them. It was a bit of a bloodbath for a lot of these House progressive candidates. Why, why do you suppose that is? Let's start with Jen. Why do you think that was?
I think that it's just everybody is so all over the place right now. It's really hard to say. So on the one hand, you're looking at, we lost progressive seats, but then down here, Donna Shalala lost her seat, which, I kind of did a little happy dance, but it turned back. The Democrats lost 2 congressional seats in South Florida. 2 have switched over to red. And they're just running around like, how did this happen to us? Because they are that oblivious. And that really, I think that you need this wake up call personally. Like, I think it is a wake up call. The progressive seats don't win easy. It's hard enough to get rid of any incumbent, but then to do it with somebody who is running an insurgent, most likely ghosted and blacklisted campaign, we're fighting 1,000 times harder. So I think our results are always going to be more seemingly less significant, but they're there. We do have Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman that got in, and I think there's a couple others. So, it is happening. It's happening. It's just not as fast as we would like it to happen.
Right. Well, and nationwide, one of the things that I have tried to do for the entire year that I was running was really get some progressive solidarity so we could build an interstate structure, an interstate structure of progressives. I went out to Delaware and I went out to West Virginia to help Paula Jean, specifically because I think it's important to know you in West Virginia, we here in Washington, we're paying attention to you. We think your race is important. I got the time to do this. I went out there on the ground in West Virginia 3 to help Hillary Turner. Fantastic people. I didn't get to meet Paula Jean while I was out there, but she was hard campaigning. But Huntington all the way down through, McDowell County, Southwest Virginia, we probably hit 12, 15,000 doors. And we had good conversations, but it's not enough. That was just 5 of us going out there for a week. Now, can we get, progressive campaigns struggle for volunteers, and we have to have volunteers. We have to have people who are willing to put in time because we struggle raising the money, right? Mm-hmm. So the only thing that's going to substitute for not having money is having people on the ground who are willing to go knock on doors. COVID was bad for everybody this year.
Yeah.
I am pretty sure I could have gotten on the ballot if it hadn't been for the fact that we just made a campaign decision not to knock on doors. We were 2,500 votes shy in a race that, boy, I want to say well over 300,000 people voted for in the primary. We could have picked up those 2,500 seats if we'd done this differently or that differently, due to the COVID restrictions. But I'm not going to, we're going to try it again. I mean, whether it's going to be me doing it again or whether we're going to focus on somebody else, we learned a lot. My whole campaign team came from our local DSA. And so I had a field director, a tech director, a treasurer, a campaign manager, and nobody took any money except for the campaign manager. And he only took what would be considered a pittance. It was a stipend. He got $1,000 a month, for him being the guy who handles all the stress, but everybody was super passionate about that. So you got to find a candidate who people can really get behind. I didn't even really want to do it, but everybody looked at me and were like, "You're the guy who's got to do it. You're the one who's got to do it."
That's what happened to me.
You speak with passion. You're clear about the issues. You're people-centered. We can get people behind you, and we did. We got 35,000 votes in this district and still missed the primary, or missed the general ballot. But we can replicate those things if we have, as Kerri said, internal organizational structure where people have defined tasks. They know what they're doing. When we got on the ground in West Virginia, they had Hillary Turner. Now I love Hillary, but they did not have a great campaign structure. They had money in the bank and they didn't know what to do with it. And right away, my team stepped in and said, "You need to do this, this, and this. Let's get that money spent. Let's put it where it needs to go." And so you've got to have that kind of organization. You can't do, I think everything starts out a little bit fly by the seat of your pants, but you have to put real structure in place and be competent right from the start. And I think that is a real struggle.
Yeah. How about, so that's resources, that's networking, assuming at least some
and
of
training,
these
training.
And
people
training,
who
right?
have done it, who are willing to teach other people how to do it.
Right. That to some extent, BNC was really helpful with that in that capacity and served in that capacity. But a lot of the problem of what you're talking about is that all the egos get in the way. And when the egos get in the way, then it gets complicated. If we could have every single one of the people like us that ran our type of campaign, and we all actually just said, you know what? We're going to be our own whole thing. This is the whole, and just really form like a national thing. The amount of ego interference in being able to do that would be absurd. And that's a big part of it when you talk about organizing, because everybody wants credit. I look at this movement for a People's Party and it looks really good. It's really good in theory. I went to their meeting, to forming their legal team to start getting on ballots and doing all this stuff. And it seems good in theory, but there's just, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical of the ability to actually get it done to where there's viable candidates nationwide.
I have said
there's some merit in it launching and then course correcting, right? So, let's see where that goes. I share that.
Absolutely.
Share that.
One of the things that was,
sorry,
I was going to say, one of the things that was really important to my campaign was that our core team, the six of us who are running this campaign, we were flexible about everything. We came back anytime the wind changed direction. We got back together and we said, how do we need to adjust to this? And to their credit, people who had done work and had put ideas on the table were willing to pull those ideas and say, I worked on that. I'm not going to push it because stuff has changed and it's not the right time now. I don't need to own this. We're doing this as a team. As long as, if you can keep that team mentality and that the goal is to the end, we want to win this congressional seat. My team was absolutely fantastic with that. I just give them all the credit in the world. But you're absolutely right, Jen. It goes to ego. You can't have ownership of this. Can we at least have the same vision of where we want to be at the end of it?
Yeah. Is there a challenge in, so again, that's resourcing, that's training, that's fundraising and networking and so forth, right? Synergies and whatnot. Is there an inherent challenge in the messaging, right? So I don't know what kind of media you guys received in your campaigns. I'm assuming less than Jamie Harrison did, let's say, right? Is there, are there inherent challenges, in media, in framing and getting over that hump of, they're trying to take your guns away and they're socialists and they're radical, what are the challenges in that, and how do we overcome just the delivery, the framing, the messaging? Let's put a Kerri on.
I could say that I could at least start from the pinnacle of it was Bernie should have never referred to himself as a democratic socialist. That to me was sort of like the beginning of this movement of having this difficulty in having to explain to people, no, we're really not socialist. And no, not that there's anything wrong with the Democratic Socialists of America or anything like that, but Bernie wasn't one. He still isn't one. And now you have that as a major fear word that keeps being brought up every time we talk about things like Medicare for all. So there's this total deprogramming that has to go into this. That's part of it. And it's a very education-based campaign. And that's what we've all been trying to do. And we have to deprogram people from the right. We have to pull the people from the center. We're getting ghosted by the media. And so, it's a huge part of it. And so we have turned to our own media. I mean, we have essentially, there has been formations in alternative and independent media. It's not sufficient to reach the mainstream, clearly. And that's a disadvantage that we have. But I think that the more of us and the bigger our media, alternative media gets, then that becomes more mainstream. And that's really where that's where I see it turning in terms of getting like media and getting the message out there. But yeah, the ignorance knows no bounds in terms of content.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a president right now who's disputing the process of counting. Speaking of,
it's difficult for him to grasp.
Right.
Sometimes concepts are very hard to understand for people.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of levels of ignorance, what are your thoughts on that, Kerri, about the challenges of what Jen was talking about, breaking through, finding media, framing, through all the candidate interviews, you always talk about like common sense gun reform. Democrats have internalized that they're taking your guns away to such an extent that they always preemptively say, I support the Second Amendment. I'm not trying, they do that just even when unprompted, right? How do we get off of that defensive on our heels to being offensive? Like, Bernie was out there waving his finger saying, what's right and so forth. How do we make that transition, Kerri? What are your thoughts on that?
Traditionally, the right's always been better at messaging, right? We've always thought that being correct about something is going to be enough, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
When Jen referred to the Everglades restoration and working alongside a Republican group there, I'm sure she was conscious of the words she used with them, right? Because some things are triggering. When I go, so Delaware is a small state. So we have a blue, very blue county. We have a purple and we have a red county. I can go down to our red county, like deep Trumpster territory. And I can talk about any people-centered piece of legislation and they'll hear me as long as I don't say Medicare for all, but I can say universal health care. I can say
their language. You speak their language.
Exactly. But certain things have been demonized by Fox News or whatever, right? I can't even put it all on Fox News. Even MSNBC and CNN will say, act like Medicare for all is a dirty term, right? Yeah. And so when people are hearing that, they freak out. But we need to sometimes understand that we have to change our words. AOC came down and helped me campaign in 2018. The way she spoke here was very different than in her own district because she understood that the people needed to hear something different, right? And so kind of what we've all been saying, getting away from this establishment mindset, understanding that every community is different, but if the power of people-centered policy is it's people-centered and they love it, right? Because it works for them. And so we don't have to have somebody say Medicare for all. They might be in a district where they can only say universal health care or free at the point of service and not put a title to it yet. They might not be able to say Green New Deal, but they say everything that's in the Green New Deal. And that doesn't mean that they're not on the same team. It just means they understand their district, which allows them to truly serve their people. And it's about districts. It's about different cultures as far as race. There's different gender cultures. There's different faith cultures. Everything is something that we have to take into account. And the right is amazing at doing that. They're almost like gangs. Gangs prey on those who don't have family. So does the Republican Party. They say, "Oh, they're coming for your jobs. Oh, people don't even fully know who they are. They just know that it doesn't feel good that their life is falling apart. And yet we think we have all these answers, but we can't remove our ego from it, as Jen would say, to be able to come and explain it in their terms. And if we understand our policy enough, we should be able to say in any number of ways and still have the same core piece to it, which is taking care of the people.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And such a great point back to what Jen was saying about litmus tests, right? So even if they're not explicitly saying Medicare for all, but if you say universal healthcare, single payer, whatever, right? There's a nuance to that, but it doesn't go so far as like Medicare for all, those who want it. There's a bad faith component to it, right? But there is a nuance that that might fall prey to litmus tests if you're not aware of the nuances.
Exactly. And that's where the training comes in, right? All of the folks that say that they really care about changing things, who do pay attention to politics as much as we do, we have to have a training so that there's this mutual understanding. Very rarely do you find somebody that is part of the far right, or even just the quote unquote moderate Republicans, who don't have the same talking points, who don't understand how to speak across the board to the same exact thing. And yet for some reason we can't. We keep saying, "Oh, we're so focused on the people. Our platform's about the people, blah blah blah." But we don't even know how to speak to people. People love Trump because he speaks in plain language, right. Really. But we want to use. We want to oftentimes come across as if we're belittling if we're not understanding where you're coming from, because right now it's not fitting our idea of what is right.
Right. Yeah, any thoughts on that, Jen, Jason?
I mean, I've always found that a representative or anybody in elected office, that what their job is to represent whoever their constituents are. And it is very subjective, and every area is very different. And so when I no longer am looking at things like this red and blue thing. It's very different now. So, to me, you're either corporate or you're not. What you refer to as people-centered, I mean, I think of as populist. And when you are with what people want, it's not difficult to be popular, right? Like, it's not difficult. The harder part is getting the message out there, which is we have to fight, like, claw to do it. But it's not a hard sell. It's an easy sell. And if you're speaking directly to the people in that area in their language, it's an easy sell, because these are all things that people want. So I think what happens is a lot of the people that are centrists, and this is Dems every bit as much as it's Republicans, they like to use fear tactics and words to keep everybody in line. They're going to keep everybody in line, and it's all fear-based. And so they know exactly what buttons to push with which groups to keep everybody in line. And that's where we are. And I really wish that we would stop I wish the word party would be just out of the entire equation. Yeah. So to me, it's first it's people, and then it's policy. And party shouldn't be even, that has no bearing on any of these things that matter to actual people. And yet that's what's controlling the whole system. And that's what's holding us up and keeping us fighting and keeping everything labeled. And it's just, I refuse to deal with that anymore. So if somebody wants to be my ally on Everglades restoration, but they don't agree with me on a woman's right to choose, that's fine. I don't need to, this isn't somebody that I'm maybe being best friends with, but let's work on what we can work together. So I think when we break it down to policy and introduce policies. And that's why I love the idea of having general initiatives on our election. It's like, if we could all just vote as a country on, do we want Medicare for all? And it was phrased how people understood it, it would overwhelmingly pass. So would legalization of marijuana. So would getting out of Afghanistan and all the other wars. All of those things would overwhelmingly happen if we focused on policy. And it would come from the left, the right, the blue, and the red. And so I hate getting caught up in that stuff, because it just makes us very unproductive.
Yeah. Love it. Well said. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Jason?
Jen said it brilliantly. I've just been sitting here thinking of about a conversation I had for a good 15, 20 minutes with a woman walking down the street in Huntington, West Virginia, who was clearly poor, and she had a child with her who was disabled in a motorized wheelchair, and we started talking. We were talking about candidates, we were talking about Paula Jean, talking about Hillary. And we didn't talk about party at all. And she was, we got on talking about how you almost need a 4-year degree unless you're going to go into the trade. You almost need a 4-year degree these days, to be what high school was back 30, 40 years ago, right? And so we got on to, but it's so hard to get into college and it's so hard to pay for college and you're coming out of it with debt, and she didn't want the debt. And I said, well, would you believe that Paula Jean believes that we should have free college up through, at least your 4-year degree? And she thought it was a fantastic idea. We didn't talk Democrat. We didn't talk Republican, anything. I noticed at the end of the conversation that she had a Trump Pence bracelet on. We did not talk about the presidency. We talked about healthcare policy. She had a child who was disabled. Let me tell you about what we want to do in terms of making sure you have access to, not access, I shouldn't even use the word access, but you actually get the healthcare that you need without feeling like you're going to go into bankruptcy, that your kids get the education that they deserve without you going into bankruptcy. And we had those conversations, and we walked away from that being personally like we had communicated, and we had a very friendly, amicable conversation. I turned to my friend Michelle after. I said, did you notice the Trump Pence bracelet? She said, no, I didn't even see that. I said, I was looking at it the whole time, and I was wondering what I would say, what I could say to not trigger what I felt I knew a typical Republican response would be. So you kept it at the level of, let's talk about the real policy. And when you do that, it was an amazingly productive conversation. And we might have picked up a couple of votes right there for Paula Jean and Hillary on that ballot, because she was not impressed with her current representation, who was Republican. So having those conversations in one-on-one or in small groups or in some kind of town hall where people really feel like they're getting to understand the policy and also trusting the person who is talking to them. If we don't build that, we're not going to be able to take power away from the democracy. We have to be able to have those really personal, meaningful exchanges that get people to understanding what policy is that will help their lives.
Yeah, and that, let me springboard on that a little bit and ask the next question. Like, there's, that's an impression, right? So you may or may not have earned her vote, but you definitely made an impression, right? And you got her thinking, and maybe next time she thinks more when she hears a candidate talking about policy similar, she might be more open to it, and there's an evolution, right? Then advertising, they say 7 impressions before it sort of seeps in or whatever, right? And going back to the election yesterday, there were awesome candidates, right? I'm sure we could nitpick their campaigns, and none of them were flawless, right? Adrian Bell and Mike Siegel and Julie Oliver and all these people. Kerri Eastman is the one that's the biggest head scratcher for me, because I think Joe Biden flipped the district, but she didn't, right? I think is the result on that. And I just can't wrap my head around that. If you can't, how is Medicare for all or universal health care, or however she framed it, I'm sure effectively to her constituency during a pandemic, not landing? And if not now, how and when can we ever land that, right? Like, how do you, I guess, how do we keep pushing forward in the face of such head-scratching defeats? And not just candidates who are running against Republicans. If you go to California and you look at David Kim's race in California 34, Angelica Duenas, her race in California 29, they were both running against awful corporate Democrats. And David came close, and Angelica didn't even really come close. So incumbency
that familiarity of incumbency, we have to recognize that it's going to take a few tries. We are going to have to, we cannot run a race. I mean, I'm having a campaign meeting right after this, and we're going to talk about, are the conditions right for us to run again? Are we going to run again? We're talking about it very seriously. And if we are, we need to get started right away. So we're going to have that conversation tonight. But to recognize that, it took Corey second time around. And I don't know how many times Rashida or Ilhan ran, maybe they fluked it in the first time. But to not give up, if you feel like you've got the right candidate and you've got the right messaging and just a couple of things didn't go the right way, but you think you've got a reasonable chance again, and maybe even if you don't have a reasonable chance again, that you do it anyway, because we have to keep fighting every incumbent, every race, every time. We have to keep doing it, and we will get wins by attrition and learn a lot in the process. And it will get better as we go on.
Yeah, I know someone that ran against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the terrible Debbie Wasserman Schultz. What lessons did you learn, bumping up against that deeply entrenched incumbent?
I actually really enjoyed the whole thing for the most part. From start to finish, it was a privilege. It really was a very privileged experience to be able to do this. And I think that there's a few reasons why people don't usually win the first time they run. And the real issue is there are so many variables. There are so many variables that overlap. So it's very difficult in a campaign that takes place over, say, 2 years, and it's by the seat of your pants and things are changing. In this one, we had a pandemic. Like, there's always changes and things moving. So it's so hard to pinpoint which variables needed to be tweaked and what needed to be adjusted. And so it's trial and error. But I think primarily better the second time because you know more. You have a more seasoned team. You've learned your demographic better. You obviously learn from your mistakes, because on a campaign, you can't learn from mistakes. It's a short-term temporary business. So it's not like, oh, we did this wrong, we'll do it better next time. There is no next time. So that's why I think that it does take more than once. And also it is name recognition. It's hugely name recognition. And it depends on what your local media situation is, what your local Dem establishment looks like, whether or not you have open and closed primaries, whether or not, like, there's so many variables that really go into play. But I think that when you have the right candidate, and that doesn't necessarily mean the person who wants that job the most. And that's something I find with candidates a lot. Of somebody will decide, I want to run for public office. I want to run for that job. I want that job. And so then they go from the top down and try to sell that person to constituents and to the community, as opposed to this being an organic sort of event that springs up from someone who's a community leader and is already assessing the community and knows what's going on and knows what's needed. And then that becomes the spokesperson for that community. That's much more of an organic method of getting, to me, what would be the more viable candidate, as opposed to someone who just wants that, so we're going to sell that. And I don't know enough about the candidates that lost or everybody's individual circumstance, but this ultimately comes down to the right candidate in the right district at the right time. And those things are there's a lot of variables, and it's very difficult. And it comes down to your gut. It comes down to your gut on your instinct in your district. That's what I think ultimately.
Yeah. Kerri, you also challenged an incumbent, and then in the next race, Jessica Scarrain challenged an incumbent, and I would assume you imparted some wisdom to her, or at least met with her, or whatever. What lessons did you learn? What did you share with her, if you don't mind sharing, or what would you share in general for someone considering running? Right. So we have to keep building this movement. We have to inspire the next. We have to beget the next generation of candidates. Right. The next cycle should be starting now, basically, right? So,
yes.
What would you say to someone that's, considering running?
Yeah, I think that, the ground has been softened by all of our races, right? Yeah. And so it'll make it easier for folks coming the next time. However, it doesn't mean that the same type of work doesn't need to be done. Name recognition is never going to be something that you just overcome just because the ground is softened, right? They're more likely to pay attention just because they're used to now insurgent races. But but people are still going to wonder, where'd this person come from? Right. So building constituencies is going to be a huge deal. Even I don't know about both of you guys, but if it's how much help there was that wasn't able to be outwardly given, right? Because of the consequences to that organization or that individual, but they truly gave a lot of help. And being able to understand that and understanding that ultimately it was better for them not to do it for the well-being of the forward movement of people in general is important. It's important to make sure that you really believe what you're running on, not that just somebody is telling you, oh, this is a great thing to run on, or you really connect with yourself and say, am I running because I feel I can make a difference, or is it because people said it would be cool if I ran, right? Because now that it's become kind of, it's become kind of like the sexy thing to do, as opposed to, when we were running, it was like, it was a major thing. Like that was something you just didn't do. You didn't challenge an incumbent, especially of the statuses that we were challenging at that time. And now it's kind of like, oh, it's a thing to do, and people aren't taking it as seriously in some cases. And I think that kind of points back to what Jen said, like the differences in the types of losses and the loss margins largely have to do with the types of candidates now that some are just as much believers and they fully believe what the people-centered policies to their core, and some are just riding the bandwagon, and we have to be on the outside. We have to be conscious of that. But as the candidate, you have to really look to yourself and say, why am I running? Am I truly doing it for the right reasons? And you owe that not just to yourself, but to all the people who will put in their blood, sweat, and tears for you, because an insurgent campaign is rough and lonely.
I hear beautifully said. And we were aiming for an hour, so I don't want to keep you guys. But what you said is what I admire about all three of you, and why I wanted to have you on this panel is, you ran through the finish line and you didn't stop running, right? You're, like Jen said, she believes in these issues and she's fighting for these policies first. All three of you are, and I admire that about you. And, Jason, when you lost your race, I saw you out in West Virginia, like immediately. The dude didn't even take a nap, right? He was out there, phone banking and knocking on doors. I admire that. And Kerri, you've done the very same. So, thank you for all the work you've done and continue to do. Before we go, let me ask, Jen, I know you've launched Generational Change. Tell us what that is. Where can people find you?
So Generational Change is a podcast. My campaign manager came up with the idea. At first, I thought it was really corny. It is kind of corny, but it's a podcast. We're nonpartisan, and our concept is transforming politics into service. That's what we're about. My campaign was a service campaign. We were always community service oriented. And that's what we're trying to spread. I want to promote those kinds of candidates. I like to give a platform to people that are serving the community and not serving corporate or party interests. So that's what we're trying to counterbalance the people that are stifling us and ghosting us, and try to provide a platform for people that are wanting to serve. And then my volunteers from my campaign are still out. We're still doing service. It's called GenCore. And we are going to be adopting a street and a dune. And we have all sorts of very exciting plans. So I'm still doing service, and we're just putting it out there and trying to keep everybody educated as much as possible. But generationalchange.com. And you can also find us at GenFL23 on Instagram and on Twitter. And you subscribe on YouTube. Check us out, Generational Change.
Right on. I did mean to pull up you guys' handles so they're across.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Fancy high tech. I got.
Ooh.
Kerri, what are you up to? Anything? I know you're always doing organizing, activism. Yeah. Anything you want to make mention of?
I'm still working on that national thing I told you about that we can't share yet. But in the state, I am rebuilding an organization called Delaware Alliance for Community Advancement, which focuses on, recentering power, or for the first time, actually bringing power back to communities of color throughout the state. And then I was recently reelected to be National Committee Woman. I won in a special election just after I ran, and then was reelected. and using that platform to reorganize the Democratic Party to make sure that people who have not been at the table are now at the table. Sometimes the party's appreciative and sometimes not, but I think that it's been exciting to see more people demanding more of the party that most of us were raised to support.
Yeah, here. Man, thanks for doing that. And Jason, what are you, I know you just got back from campaigning and knocking on doors and,
Yeah,
during election night.
It never slows down. I feel like now that we've gotten on the other side of the actual election and it looks like Joe Biden will probably win this, and I am happy for that. I think Trump. The worst part about Trump is the way that he really does embolden the alt-right and the fascists, and I think he promotes danger to a lot of like real immediate danger to a lot of communities in this country, which is flat out unacceptable. And so just in that regard, I think a Biden presidency is a win. But in terms of these long-term policies, I have no faith that the Biden presidency is going to get anything done, and they're still going to have a Republican Senate to contend with. So. I'm going to be doing what I can locally. Washington State, we have our Kerri, you had mentioned the Delaware State Democratic Party that you're involved in. So I'm a state committee representative for the Washington State Democrats, my legislative district, and so we're coming up on our reorganization periods here in December and January. I'm going to be pushing for leadership change at the state level. Probably going to run for my seat again on the state committee. We're going to try and get some good people in county leadership positions. So all of that is in the works. I'm working on platform rewrites and bylaws rewrites for my local party. So there's always a lot of work to be done at a lot of different levels. It never stops. It's thoroughly exhausting. But, I think people like Kerri and Jen and myself are the people who are willing to take on that work and do it. And really, I expect nothing in return. If this is work that I do because I've been an activist for 30 years and it needs to be done. The work needs to be done, and it's one of those if not me who kind of things. And I'm always happy to delegate if somebody wants to do the work, but a lot of people don't want to do the work that needs to be done, and so it falls to people like ourselves who are like, yeah, I'm juggling 6 projects right now, but I'll take on another project because the project needs to be done. So I'm in the middle of that, and like I just said, my campaign team is meeting tonight, and whether we come out of it with a decision on whether we're going to run immediately, we don't know yet. There are some dynamics going on, but I would definitely say within 10 days we will have made a decision whether we're going to tackle this thing again.
Great. Yeah, I hope you do. Yeah, again, like I said, I admire all 3 of your work. Thank you for all that you do. Your authenticity is inspiring, and who knows who you reach and who you inspire, like Jen's volunteers. It's this momentum that that you all build and we all can build together. So, thanks for taking some time to chat with me today. I'm sure we all didn't sleep last night, so as soon as we hang up, we'll go take a nap, catch up on your sleep. I'll talk to you again all soon. Godspeed, and thanks for taking some time to chat with me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Hey guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.